All right. So, welcome to All the Things with Ashley. Today's edition is going to be about plans of correction. And so we are going to take the next 15 to 20 minutes to kind of break a few things down. I'm glad to be able to share this information with you. If you are not familiar with who I am, my name is Ashley Austin Hill. I am the Principal Compliance Consultant and the founder of Real Organized Advocacy. I offer services to assisted living facilities here in the great state of Texas, as well as services to HCS providers. We have a weekly series called All the Things with Ashley that will also get posted to other social media sites and mediums. However, I will post them live from Facebook every Thursday. Today, we're going live via Zoom because I want to be able to share my screen and show you some of the information that I have to share. Okay, so now that we're here, we are ready to go. I am going to start by discussing what So I'm going to start by discussing what a plan of correction is and what that means for assisted living facilities and HCS providers. So a plan of correction is essentially a document or a plan that you must submit to Health and Human Services when you have been found in violation of a particular regulation or regulatory standard. Typically, those are found when a surveyor walks into your building and they are there for a complaint investigation and or a recertification. If you are in an assisted living facility, if you're in HCS, it may be coming during your survey when you were trying to recertify. It may come as a result of a complaint investigation and waiver survey and certification, which is your regulatory body offering you that plan of correction. Okay, so one of the things that I want to discuss is what should be included in a plan of correction. Okay, so let's look at what I call corrective action planning, and that should be for any facility that is out there. Okay, so plan of correction is the technical term for the document that you are being sent by Health and Human Services. Corrective action planning is a system that you would develop within your facility. Okay, so if you have a system developed within your facility, if you were to receive a plan of correction by a Health and Human Services surveyor, investigator, or what have you, then you will already know how to address the issue that comes before you. Okay, so we want to correct a deficiency that may be found in your facility. And if you have your own compliance program or you have really sound managers or staff who can point out issues and areas of concern, then you can apply the corrective action planning method internally as well with a Health and Human Services violation or citation. Okay, so one thing that I mentioned in my handbook, and I'm showing it to you here, is that the facility should have its own correction process. Create a process for corrective action planning. This should include a formal corrective action document, process for completing a corrective action plan, and development of internal processes. This is an important step in developing a consistent work progress, as a facility will be surveyed every 2 years and most likely will have some complaint investigation in between those surveys. Now, survey times have now gone to 3 years for some facilities. So you may have a span of time where you don't have a surveyor coming to your building and you may not have any issues that arise or any complaints that were called in to Health and Human Services. That's great. But in the event that you do, you still should have a corrective action planning process. Okay, so that corrective action plan should include the following: assessing citations. In assessing citations, that means what happened in the issue that we found. So were the residents affected? Was it a facility error? What happened in this issue that we as a facility are culpable for or responsible for, versus what happened, and is it a staffing issue? Is it an issue that is beyond the facility's control? What happened so that we can properly address what is going on, okay? In your corrective action planning, you should also have a development of corrective procedures. So what does that mean? What actions will you take to correct a violation? What will you do to ensure that if it's a violation that can harm a resident, how are you going to ensure that residents will not be harmed ongoing? And how are you ensuring that the immediate issue will be remedied, okay? And then you want to make sure that you have policy and procedure to support whatever you are going to correct. So for instance, in an assisted living facility, you may have policies for abuse and neglect, or for incident, accident, and injury. But if you don't have a policy for an elopement and a resident elopes and you find that resident, one, you do have to report that to Health and Human Services, but two, immediately you should be thinking about, how am I going to prevent this from happening in the future? Okay, so we kind of talked about that already. Who was affected? Is it the facility's error? What issues do we need to resolve to make sure people are safe? But now I have to put a policy in effect that I am also training my staff, my residents, and their loved ones on, that says if a resident elopes, staff are to immediately search the premises. Staff are to immediately search the surrounding area. Then staff are to call 911 if the resident is not found within 30 minutes to an hour, or whatever those steps are going to be to satisfy the issue that you have already experienced and to prevent it in the future, okay? Right? And so once you develop that process, then it should be put into a policy, and then that policy should be trained, or staff should be trained on that policy, as well as educating residents and or their loved ones, okay? So corrective action planning is a multi-step process in which you are assessing the situation. You are interviewing those that are involved. You are looking at the facility or the provider's responsibility in that issue. Then, as a result of what you find, you are then developing the corrective procedure. What actions are going to be taken to correct the current situation, and then what actions are going to be taken to prevent a future situation. Your policy and procedure will support what actions you are taking, but will also remedy this issue from happening in the future by providing a set of responsibilities for staff and for management in order to, one, ensure residents can elope. Two, if they do elope, there's a protocol for which to do it. And three, putting measures in place within the facility that will make elopement less possible, okay? So maybe there is a staff who is at the main door, or the exit door has a chime on it, or whatever may have you, so that you know when people are leaving in and out of the facility, okay? All right, so just want to stop and make sure I am checking the comments. Okay, no comments yet, that's fine. Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about is what a corrective action plan looks like. Specifically, we're going to start with assisted living, and then we're going to move on to life safety and to HCS, okay? So in understanding what we're going to look at, I want to first explain what tools that a direct care staff or residents or managers should have, rather, managers or staff should have, in order to make sure that corrective actions have actually taken place. Because when you are creating a plan of correction for Health and Human Services, not only do they want to see what you've done and how you're going to remedy the situation, and then also what you are putting in place to prevent it from happening in the future, they also want to know how you're going to monitor this. Okay, so are you going to have checklists? Are you going to do internal surveys? Are you going to do reminders within your facility? So those are things to think about when you are preparing for a plan of correction. Okay, so let's talk about what a plan of correction looks like for assisted living, and I'm going to share my screen right now. Okay, so this is what a plan of correction looks like when it comes from Health and Human Services. So I don't have the full page up because I want to make sure that I can show you all of the plan of correction. So for instance, if a surveyor was to come into your building, they're going to cite you, then they'll go back, type it up, and send it to you within 10 working days. Those citations are going to be included in a chart or a table such as this. Okay, so this is actually a plan of correction that I have written and that was accepted. I've taken out certain information to protect the facility and also the surveyor. So in this particular plan of correction, this plan of correction came from a health surveyor. Okay, so health surveyor and life safety surveyors will both use the same form, but the information will be specific to their particular regulatory responsibilities. So health, in this particular plan of correction, we were discussing coordination of care and medications. This facility was cited for improper administration of medication, okay? And in that, one of the issues was staff were leaving their scheduled duty and medication was not being delegated accordingly, all right? So in the corrective action plan, we broke down the criterion for responding to plans of correction. And so if you want to know where these criterion come from, when you are cited, a program manager will send you a letter, okay, and the plan of correction, which we're looking at. And the letter will look something like this. And they're going to lay out what you must submit for each POC, okay? And then in that, it says how the facility will accomplish corrective actions for the residents affected by the violation, how the facility will identify other residents with the potential to be affected by the same violation, the measures the facility will put in place or systemic changes the facility will make to ensure the violation will not recur. And then criterion 4, how the facility will monitor its corrective actions to ensure that the violations are being corrected and will not recur. 5 is when the corrective action will be completed. So I'm going to show you each one of these criterion on the document we were just looking at, okay? So let's go back over here, all right? So in this particular plan of correction, criterion 1, what corrective actions are being made now? So all staff have been trained to not leave their scheduled duty unless they have notified the manager or next person of authority. All staff have been trained to complete medication administration duties prior to their shift ending if they are the delegated responsible staff to administer medication. All appointed staff have received medication delegation training. Residents 1 through 5, medications have been reviewed to ensure residents are receiving medication administration, and it should say appropriately, okay? Criterion 2, what residents were affected, okay, or had the potential to be affected? Essentially, all residents in the facility had the potential to be at risk for facing a serious health condition as a result of the facility's failure to administer medication. You have to acknowledge the issue. And when staff are not on duty and they're key staff, especially when it comes to medication administration or infection control, abuse and neglect, you have to realize that one staff making an error can affect all of the residents. Okay. Now, if you know for a fact that it only could affect residents 1 through 5, then you would put that. Okay. So for criterion 3, which if we go back to the letter, criterion 3 is the measures the facility will put into place or the systemic changes the facility will make to ensure that the violation will not recur. Okay. Well, these are the changes that we are putting in place. Okay. The executive director has trained the house manager and assistant house manager of delegation of authority and hierarchy of responsibility. We put this in place first because if there is not a staff on duty to do the medication delegation, then the house manager or the manager must then step in to ensure that the facility is covered and responsibility is being met. The house manager and the assistant house manager have trained the staff in the facility of the delegation of authority and hierarchy of responsibility, okay? Meaning the staff now know they cannot just leave the facility without passing on responsibility to another person, okay? Should be a house manager or the assistant house manager or another appointed staff, okay? The other step in the systemic change. The appointed staff administering medication have received medication administration training and have been delegated by a third-party contracted nurse. So these changes have been made, yes, to address the current concern, but they also prevent a future medication error issue, okay? And then finally, criterion 4 would be facility monitoring, excuse me. The executive director will ensure the delegation of authority is always updated with the current manager and assistant manager at least once per year and as needed when new managers are hired. The manager will review medication administration records weekly to ensure there is no future medication errors, okay? So this would be the example of a health plan of correction. And the form that would be provided by Health and Human Service is the 3724. With the 3724, Health and Human Services also sends a letter, a PLC letter, which we read from, that explains how you need to complete the PLC and when the PLC should be returned back to Health and Human Services representative, which will be a program manager and their admin staff likely. The other document that you will receive with your plan of correction is called a Form 3630, and this is a survey inspection summary report, all right? This document tells you the areas of non-compliance that you are being cited for or the areas of compliance that you are not being cited for. So life safety has its own section at the top. This particular form, this was life safety going out, and they found no issue with the fire alarm system or the sprinkler system, which they were there to review, but they did find issue with the physical plan of the environment. So this facility was not in compliance. If you were in health survey for an assisted living facility, then all of these areas are areas of areas that surveyors use to categorize certain TAC codes or TAC references, okay? So for instance, if you were to have an issue with admissions or working with clients, you may in fact have a non-compliance tag in this location. If you had a issue with infection control, you would have a X in this location. Since we were talking about medications a minute ago, this section would have been filled in with an X to show that the medications are not meeting the requirement, or the administration of medications are not meeting requirements, okay? So the other form that will come with this is the 3614, and this is a report of contact. The report of contact is going to show the information about the facility. It's going to tell you what type of contact the surveyor had. Is this a complaint investigation or is it a licensing inspection? It's going to talk about follow-up and intake numbers if this was a investigation. And then also it's going to reveal what your capacity is and what your census is in that facility. You'd have your license number here, when your license will expire here, the name of the surveyor that is in your facility or that wrote the citation will be here. And then here it's going to say what the decision is. So for this particular facility, it didn't meet the licensure requirements. So when this document was sent, there was no confusion to the provider about what the issue was, okay? Referral information will be here. Event IDs and other IDs that are specific to Health and Human Services systems and databases would be here. And then also here, you would also find the facility staff that were contacted during the investigation and or survey, right? So we talked about what plans of correction look like for health. Here's a plan of correction for life safety. It looks the exact same. But with life safety, there's going to be less focus on corrective actions for the residents themselves, because typically the corrective actions are about the building and how management and or staff are going to properly process that corrective action plan for the building to meet life safety standards, okay? And finally, the plan of correction for HCS looks very much different on paper, but the information that you're including is pretty much the same, okay? How are you going to address the non-compliance, the current non-compliance and the future non-compliance? And then what monitoring system are you going to implement, okay? And within that, you have to have some type of systemic change, okay? So the form may look different. There may be a slight difference in lingo, but essentially the corrective action planning process is the same. So you can take what I've mentioned with the assisted living facility and put it together so that you can answer or direct your corrective action plan for HCS or Texas Home Living products, okay, or problems, okay? And you would have a waiver, survey, and certification program manager and surveyor for HCS versus assisted living, which has a regulatory health and life safety surveyor, okay? But basically, I would take that same system and complete these sections with the information that I put into, or that I gathered and put together for a home and community-based services plan of correction. So regardless if you format it the same way, the information of how I've corrected the current issue, how am I going to ensure this doesn't happen again, who was affected, and then what monitoring processes that I will put in place. All of those things are still the same, regardless if you're talking assisted living or home and community-based services. And even though the documentation may look different, the mindset and the process of corrective action planning is the same, okay? The one thing that I want to make sure I go back and mention is that the final criteria for assisted living is the completion date. Okay, so you would put that in this column here. In terms of home and community-based services, you put that information here. And so I'm going back and forth because I want people to understand that the lingo may be slightly different, or there may be a difference in how a document is formatted. But when you're thinking about corrective action planning, having a system in place for how you address issues within your facility, whether they're found by a surveyor or found by your staff, are very important, okay? So I am going to come back to plans of correction later on this year, and we're going to do a plan of correction live, and I'll be doing that and asking people to join in to help write the plan of correction. So I will post that information. It will not be coming up for quite some time. I want to make sure that I've processed that just right. So I'll come back later on in the year and make sure that we do one together, okay? So I appreciate you joining today. I appreciate you watching. I hope that this was helpful. Please remember that you can also go home, Health and Human Services website, and they do have documentation and information that will help you understand the plan of correction process. Okay, I'll drop that in the chat so that you can also go find that information. All right, y'all. I hope you have a good rest of the day. And look, we did it in less than 30 minutes. All right.